Vanessa mentioned that I've been here a couple of years now, but I want to recognize Pastor James and Emmy and Pastor Jonathan and Jennifer and Pastor Terry and Mary and Minister Tirso and Connie as well. I'm going to start with them because they are the foundation and they lift us up and they bring the word. I'm so grateful to be a part of this church. They are so kind and they are doing the work of God. So please give them a hand. Thank you so much. Of course, the aunties and the uncles, we love you. I've got a new family, a Hawaiian family, a Polynesian family, and I love the love that I receive. So I'm so thankful. I have my family is here as well, and I just want to recognize them and some friends. Pastor James, when you preached a while back, you talked about the number of 40. My husband and I are coming up on 40 years in September. So it's been a roller coaster, but God, I'll just put it that way, but God. Our daughter Olivia is here, and my son did call me this morning. He's in Georgia. My brother is here. He's here from St. Louis. You all know when I went home back at Thanksgiving, he lost his wife of 40 years, but he is doing some healing and some grief, and he's coming through it, and he actually changed his airline ticket to stay over today. He was going to be going back yesterday, but I'm grateful that you're here with us. And I don't want to miss anybody, but Sharon and Lloyd and Kiki and Gary and all of my other family, I love you so much. Thank you for being here. And as you know, we are members of one body, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and get into the message. Last year for Mother's Day, Olivia, my daughter, actually gave the word, and she talked about Samuel. She talked about Hannah and Peninnah. I don't know if you were here, if you remember, but they were the two wives of Elkanah. I may have not said it right, and I'm just kind of doing this from memory. But Hannah couldn't have children. And it's funny because all of this kind of goes along with my message as well, but it's basically about generations. And Pastor Jonathan taught a class, and I was going to actually put this into the slides. I got so many slides in there, guys. I didn't get it in, but it's a genogram, and we talk about our family. So this message today is about the family of Israel, and then I'm going to give you a little bit of information on me before I go into the message. But Samuel played a big part. Hannah couldn't have a child. The other wife, the second wife, just gave her the blues. I mean, this happens. If you think about your family, you can think one generation, two generations, three generations, but you know that there are some people that you dearly love and you care about, and there are some people that we pray for, okay? So Peninnah gave Hannah a hard time, but God blessed her. She actually prayed for a son, and God blessed her and gave her a son, and she gave the son to the church, and that's Samuel, the prophet. And Samuel was the one who anointed King Saul and then went and anointed King David. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of the generations of Israel. So we're going to get the first slide here. Okay. All right. This says the lineage of Abraham to Jesus. Now, I'm not going to go all the way to Jesus. If you know, there are 42 generations, and they're split up into three. There's 14, 14, and 14, and I'm going to go quickly through the first 14. But I want to start with Abraham, and I'm going to just go with Hagar and Sarah. Okay, and so this again is that story. This is that same story with Peninnah and Hannah, where they just have a rivalry going, and I can't have a baby, you can, you have more babies than I have. They want to make the husband happy, but there's usually some some rivalry going on. So children, I think they've all stepped out. I hope that when you talk to your kids at home today, you'll ask them about things that they love about being with their mom, love about being with their families. And as you sit here today, I want you to think about your families as well. I told you I was going to tell you a little bit about mine before I go in any further in Hagar and Sarah. Late in my life, I was probably about 17 the first time I went to Mississippi. And that's where my mother was born, and then she moved to Illinois later. But I didn't know my great-grandfather. His name was Dan. And then my grandfather was Floyd. And Floyd died in 1960, and my brother teases me and said that I killed him because that was the year I was born. So a little joke there. Never met him, but he had 2 wives as well. My grandmother was the second wife. And I met some of those family members when I went to Mississippi for the first time, and some of them were kind of cold and standoffish, and I didn't know who they were or anything. And just about a month or so ago, I talked to a cousin, and I wasn't even sure how he fit into the family, whether he was the relative of the first wife or the relative of our family. It turns out that his mother was the sister of my grandfather. And just to make the long story short, he said that sometimes there's loyalties to the first family. So maybe they weren't being mean, but because the first wife and that family, so just a little cold. But then we come on down and my grandmother had 12 children, kind of like Jacob, okay, 12 children. And, well, they don't talk about Dinah. She is on there. We'll hit that just a little bit. But the 12 tribes of Israel is what we're going to talk about today. And then my mother had 8. There are some things in our histories that they're not always good to talk about, nothing to be embarrassed about because you don't know how God is going to use that thing. And I do want to talk about that as well. But my mother had 8 children, and she divorced after number 5. And I'm number 7. So if you think about that a little bit, you'll know that she was not married to my father, okay? And I'm just being totally honest here, and it's just what families are. We have families that are made up of, you know, we blend them, and they're just, we love them anyway. So, so I'm going to get back to the lineage of Abraham. And so we've got Ishmael and Isaac, and they are 2 different nations, okay? God made a great nation out of both, but you know, Pastor Terry's been teaching us on Thursday night. We are into the end times and the wars, Ezekiel, and and we know that there's a war with Israel. There are people that the Muslims don't necessarily like Israel. And I found out that Ishmael is from the Saudis. And so I've been doing my homework in our Bible study, so that might be something you might want to come out to, but we are learning some great things through that. So we've got Ishmael, and we've got Isaac, and then, of course, Keturah, there's a concubine there, so another wife, and just, you know, more things that could be added to this. My daughter told me, Mom, don't make it heavy. And so I want it to be a great message for you, but I do want to give you some history, and in the Word, the scriptures are infallible. They are just given to us by God. And there's something for us to learn from it or to appreciate, but He is a just God. And He does chasten us if we need to be straightened out. And it says that, you know, you love your child if you chasten them. So at least correct. Okay, so I'm just going to move on through this tree real quick. We've got Abraham, and then we've got Isaac. Okay, and Isaac and Rebekah had 2 twins. And so Jacob is the one that we're going to talk about today. He was renamed Israel. He's a supplanter. He's a deceiver. But he is the one who God is blessing his people through. He actually talked his brother out of his birthright. Okay, and I know a lot of you know these stories. There are a lot of stories. The Bible is so amazing to me. And as I am drawing nearer to him, he is giving me and explaining, and I'm understanding his word more. But as we get through Jacob now, we talked about the 12 tribes of Israel. Jacob goes and how about we go to the next slide because it's the one, okay, here we go. This will probably help out a little bit more. This brings it on down. So he met Rachel first. But of course, Laban, his father-in-law, tricked him. Now, if you know some of these stories, just kind of wave your hand at me and let me know that you know a little bit about this. I don't want to go into great detail, but when he came up to Laban, they always go to like the near kinsman or relative. And so he went to Laban. He met Rachel first. He loved Rachel. He said, I'll work 7 years for Rachel. But when the marriage night came, and Pastor James talks about how the weddings, how they prepare these weddings. Well, when Laban brought the bride out, he actually brought out Leah, the oldest daughter. And he says, in our custom, the older daughter marries first. So while he married Leah, he agreed to work 7 more years for Rachel. And so he was able, they went through their 7-day marriage period, and he married Rachel as well. And so we're just going to kind of look at these names really quick, and I'm going to visit them a little more as I talk. But Leah birthed Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. Those are her first 4. And then she thought she couldn't have any more, so she gave her maid to Jacob. And so that's Leah's servant Zilpah, and Zilpah had Gad and Asher, and then Leah came back and was able to have Issachar and Zebulun. Rachel did, you know what, I'm gonna go ahead and pass this screen because Rachel had 2, but because she couldn't conceive initially, she gave her servant Bilhah to Jacob. And he had Dan and Naphtali, and then of course she was able to have Joseph and Benjamin, but she died in childbirth with Benjamin. And Dinah, of course, is the sister that I'm gonna refer to in a little bit as well. So if you could put up that next slide, thank you so much. It says, now Laban had 2 daughters, so I've kind of already gone over this with you. This comes from Genesis 29:16 through 29. He had fallen in love with Rachel. Laban prepared the feast, brought in his daughter Leah, and he says, why have you tricked me? That's a line that I just want to talk about really quickly because Jacob was the trickster. Remember I said Jacob tricked his twin brother Esau out of his birthright. So I almost wrote in my message, boys will be boys, but no, I turned it to you reap what you sow, okay? So, and so then he did get Rachel as well. And we'll go with the next one, please. Okay, so we're gonna move on to Genesis 29:31 through 35, and it says, when the Lord saw that Leah was hated or unwanted, because you know he loved Rachel. She had the beauty, she had the shape, she was the first one he saw. They said Leah had tender eyes, gentle eyes. But what the Lord did was he opened up Leah's womb, but Rachel was barren. And then we go on, it says, when Leah saw that she had conceived bearing children, she took her servant, when she had ceased bearing children, and I kind of covered that in the last one, she gave her servant Zilpah, to Jacob to wife. Okay, so then we know that she had 4, and then she had 2 more through Zilpah, and we're gonna go ahead and move the next one. And I hope that you will, and especially if you're taking notes, maybe just take down the scripture, and then you can go back and read it. These are great stories in the Bible. This is Genesis 30:1. When Rachel saw that she could not give Jacob children, she became jealous of her sister. So remember, we had Peninnah and Hannah that I talked about from last year's message. We've got my grandmother and the first wife, and now we've got Rachel, and she just wrestles with that sister of hers. So it says, and Bilhah, who is her maid, who is her handmaid, conceived and bore Jacob a son, and he was called Dan. Okay, then it says, Bilhah conceived again and bore a second son. Okay, and so this is where Rachel says, with mighty wrestlings. If you can imagine wrestling with somebody, I have wrestled with my sister because she wanted to have children. She wanted to please her husband as well. So she called his name Naphtali. Genesis 39 through 13, when Leah saw that she had ceased bearing children, she took her servant. Now, we already went over the names of the 12, but her servant was Zilpah. She gave him Jacob to wife, and she bare a son, and she called his name Gad, and then she had a second son, and she called his name Asher. So we've got all these kids, but Rachel doesn't have any kids yet. So let's see where we're going with this one. So in the days of the wheat harvest, this is another thing I want to take a little sidebar to. In our Thursday night class, we've been learning about the wars, and we're also looking at Ukraine and Russia. And one of the slides that Pastor Terry put up, it had Russia as the largest barley producer in the world, and Ukraine is the third. And then this last week, we talked about the natural gas. And Ukraine owns a lot of natural gas, and it's by the Mediterranean River, so maybe this is some of the reasons why, the economy and why the war is going on. But you all have to come to Pastor Terry's class for that one. But the reason I said that is because Reuben, it talks about the wheat harvest, and it talks about, and later on when I talk about Ruth, it's going to be the barley harvest. But he got some mandrakes. And mandrakes, I'm just going to say that they're aphrodisiacs, okay? So Rachel wants these mandrakes. And Leah's like, will you take my son's mandrakes too? They've got this thing going on. And so she says, you know what? Jacob can come to you tonight. You give me those mandrakes, and you can have Jacob. Well, she was hoping that these mandrakes would help her to conceive. Well, guess what? Leah conceives again. So it says, and Leah conceived again, and she bore Jacob a fifth son. She called his name Issachar. And then she conceived and bore Jacob a sixth son, and that's Zebulun. So Rachel still doesn't have any kids, but she's got these mandrakes. She doesn't have any kids yet. So you got to kind of give it to God and not worry about those potions and all that stuff, okay? We just pray to the Lord, and that's what Hannah did. She said, if you give me a son, that was last year's message, I will give him to the Lord. And she put him in the house of the Lord his whole life. He didn't shave his head. She didn't drink wine or anything. So just give it to the Lord. He will take care of whatever your heart's desires are. If you pray to him and you serve him in spirit and in truth, he will bless you. All right. So afterwards, she bore a daughter, and that was Dinah. And they usually don't talk a lot about the girls in the Bible. And we know that in some of the foreign countries, the girls can't even go to school. So when I pray for children, I pray for them all over the world. I don't separate my daughter and my son. He says, your brother as yourself, okay, in that scripture. But I pray for children all over the world. So Dinah is the first daughter. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Dinah, but I don't want to get off track. So let me go with the next slide, and then we will see if that's about Dinah. Rachel. Then God remembered Rachel, and God listened and opened her womb. She conceived and bore a son called Joseph. Now, I didn't write anything about Joseph, but man, I initially wanted to tell you about those brothers. Those brothers were mean to Joseph. One of the reasons they were mean to Joseph is because the father who loved Rachel, remember Rachel was that first one. Leah is the second, well, Leah was the first wife, but Rachel was the first one he loved. Well, this is Rachel's first son. So he gives Joseph a coat of many colors. And Joseph has dreams. I know you all have heard these stories. Raise your hand if you know about that. Thank you. So they take Joseph out into the field where the dads and moms play some parts in this stuff. Dad gave him that coat. Dad let them know that he was the favorite. So sometimes and I tell all of my nieces, and they all know it, you're my favorite. And then I tell the other one, you're my favorite. So, and they know that I do that. But he really was the favorite. And so they decided they were going to kill him. And they took him out and put him in a cistern, and then took the coat back, and it was they dipped some blood on it and told the dad, oh, he's dead. An animal must have taken him or killed him. But you know the story. Joseph precedes them, and they sell him to the Ishmaelites. Some gypsies come along, they're Ishmaelites, and they sell him, and he goes on to Egypt, and he helps them later out. God has a purpose. God has a plan that we know nothing about. So we go to, this was a hard one. Okay, so Jacob finally got one son through Rachel, and he's worked for, 20 years now he's worked for Laban. He did 7 years that he thought he was doing for Rachel, and then he found out he married Leah, so he did 7 more years, and then he did 6 years to get flocks. And the Lord just blessed him. But Jacob would do things. He would just take the weak ones or take the healthy cattle, and he'd have them reproduce. He'd put things in the water. He just had a way with things. So they just were rich. God blessed them, okay? And so he was ready to go. It's 20 years. He wants to go back to his father's home, okay, to his father's land. And so he knows that Laban does not want them to go, so he tells them, we're leaving, let's go. They get ready, they go. 3 or 4 days go by, and Laban finds out that they're gone. Of course, Laban gets in there with his band. They follow him, they catch up with him. He says, you've stolen my gods. Now, the crazy thing about this, my daughter and I were having this conversation, one time about if you serve the Lord, you're supposed to put away those other gods. Okay, you're not supposed to serve other gods. That's the thing. When he brought them out of Egypt, you don't marry into these other families because their wives will have you serving these other gods. You know the story. I'm not making this up, okay? But Laban had gods. They were stolen. So he runs after him. He's really mad because Jacob has taken all the kids, all the grandkids. He's just taken everybody, all of his flock. So he catches up with them, and he says, you've taken my daughters. You've taken my gods. And Jacob doesn't know anything about this, and he says, whoever has those gods, he curses. He said, may they be cursed. May they die. He didn't know who had those gods. Guess who had them? His love, Rachel. And Rachel had him hidden in the camel's saddle. And so she sat on him in the camel's saddle. And he says, if you find him, bring him out here, we'll kill. That one will die, whoever has him. So Rachel said, oh, Father, forgive me. I'm in the woman's way. I can't stand. Forgive me for not standing, because you knew if she stood, he was going to look in there and find those gods. So he didn't find the gods. But, of course, Jacob had said that person will die. So let's see where we are. So Jacob told his clan, let's get rid of all of these foreign gods. I love this about him. He said, we've got to get rid of all these foreign gods. So they gave their rings in their ears. Jacob took all of this stuff. He hid it in the tree that was near Shechem. And I told you I was going to tell you something about Shechem, and I'm going to tell you something about Dinah. But I'm going to come to it in a minute, okay? Because I want you to stay interested in this story, because it's an interesting story to me. So because Jacob told him, get rid of these foreign gods, God came to Jacob in Padan-aram and blessed him. And he said, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel shall be your name. So when you read in the Bible and it's talking about Israel, it's talking about Jacob, who is now Israel, but it's also talking about the Israelites, Israel, the people. So we're going to move on to the next slide. Okay, so Rachel went into labor. Now she's already had Joseph. Remember, we talked about Joseph. He hasn't been sold off yet. That's kind of later in the story, but at least you know what happens to him. She has a hard labor. The midwife said to her, do not fear, you have another son. And her soul was departing. She was dying in childbirth, okay? And she called his name Ben-Oni, but his father called him Benjamin. So she died with that second son. And remember, whoever took those gods will die. So she died. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, which is Bethlehem. So here is the story about Reuben. Okay, now Reuben was the first child of Leah. Remember, she has all these boys, 12 tribes. But the first one, so Rachel was the favorite. Rachel's bed was next to the father's bed, or the couch, or whatever you want to call it. So when she died, Reuben decided to move the bed. There's two stories about this. Move the bed, and then there's another one where he went in unto Bilhah, who was her maid, who would have taken her place. So whether he moved the bed or whether he was with her, the Bible shows both. That was not a good thing. And so he lost his birthright. He's the first son, but he loses his birthright, and the birthright goes to Joseph, okay? Let's see, Reuben was the firstborn, but because he defiled his father's couch, his father's bed, his birthright was given to his son Joseph, the son of Israel. Okay, remember Joseph was the first one for Rachel. All right. Genesis 34, 1 through 2. And I know it's a lot of writing. My daughter said, Mom, don't write so much, but I just love this story. So, now Dinah and Leah, Dinah, the daughter of Leah. Remember, there was one daughter. She had these boys and this daughter. So here comes this Shechem again. Shechem is the son of Hamor, a Hivite. And I say Hivite like this because there's just so many stories. These Hivites, okay, I'm going to take a little detour here real quick. When they came out of Egypt, he was moving out these tribes that were already there. And it wasn't, he says, it's not because you're good, it's because they're so wicked. But the Hivites, they were not supposed to, they were just supposed to get rid of all of them. But the Hivites, and I do it like this because that helps me to remember, they went and put on some old clothes and some old shoes, and they met them in the road, and I only got 10 minutes left. I better move quick. Okay, let me move quickly. Anyway, they met him in the road, and they act like they lived far away, and please let us, and so Jacob, the Israelites had mercy on him, and when they got back, they found out that they lived there, so they couldn't kill him because they had made an agreement with them. So some of those people still live in the land. Okay. So Dinah. So here's Shechem, and the prince of Shechem, the prince of Hamor, saw her, loved her, and defiled her. And so that's not good, right? You don't do that to our daughters. You don't do that to our sisters. And so they said, okay, we'll do whatever you say. So remember, they were of a different culture. So they said, get circumcised. You get circumcised like us, okay, we'll live among you. But those next two brothers, Levi and Simeon, of course, they agreed. All the men got circumcised, and the third day in, when they're sore and they're laying in their beds, those two brothers went in and slew them all. I mean, there are some stories, guys, and I want to keep it light, but they're true and they're in the Bible. So that's the story about Dinah. They grabbed their sister and took her back home, okay? So this just goes on to tell you the third day, Simeon and Levi took their swords and killed all the males. And Judah, okay? So though Judah became strong, so Judah's the fourth son. Remember, Reuben did what he wasn't supposed to do. Then you got Levi and Simeon. Judah is the fourth son. And Judah became strong among the brothers, and a chief came from him. Does anybody know who that chief? It came down the line. Remember those 42 generations through Judah. Okay, can you go to the next one, please? I hope I'm keeping your attention. Okay, so here we go. This is Judah. Judah has, and I won't go there, okay, Olivia? I know I'm on a limited time. That's another story. Please read it because it's another story. But Judah ends up having children with his daughter-in-law, and this Perez is who we're going from Judah down through the line to Yeshua, which is Jesus. So we're going to come all the way down this line. But before I get to this line, I want to go to Lot. And Lot was Abraham's nephew. Sodom and Gomorrah. Who knows Sodom and Gomorrah? Okay. If you don't know it, read it. It's another story. But Sodom and Gomorrah, the angel came and said, get your family. Remember, I don't know if it was Pastor James's message or Pastor Jonathan, but it was if I can find 40 righteous men, okay, 30, okay, 20, okay, 5. There were no righteous men, so they smoked Sodom and Gomorrah, but Lot got out. His wife turned to salt, and so it was just him and his 2 daughters. And that's another story, guys. I'm not going to go there, but the Moabites, that's another story. But I'm going to come on down to Ruth, who I thought my whole story was going to be about, and I only got like 3 minutes for Ruth. But anyway, so we're coming through Judah, and he and the daughter-in-law have Perez and then Salmon and Boaz. Salmon married Rahab. If you all remember the story about when they went in and spied out the town, and only 2 people, Caleb and Joshua, said, oh, we can take this town. Everybody else said, no, we can't take this town. Well, Rahab was the harlot, the prostitute who hung the red cord out the window, and they said, we'll save everybody in your house. You just got to have that red cord there. So she married Salmon. Salmon had Boaz and Ruth, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about that, okay? End up coming on down to King David, Solomon, and then Jesus. And this is where we're going to kind of speed this story up a little bit. So if you could go to the next slide, please. And thank you. Okay, so I put Rahab and Salmon, and they were the father of Boaz. Now, this is another family tragedy, but God knows. We think it's a tragedy, but God has a plan all the time. So there's a famine and there's death. Okay, and they talk about, I think in our class, we talked about the Lake Mead drying up a little bit. You know, we've got some drought going on. You know, you never know what's going to happen. Got to come to that class on Thursday night. Okay, I keep putting in those commercials, guys. Okay, so I'm just going to read it. It says, during the time of Judges, and Judges was a dark time. Judges, I can't even go there. I want to give you a sermon on Judges. I'm going to tell you what, read 19 and 20. It broke my heart, and it's those Benjamites, but I'm going to let you read it, okay? So the time of the Judges, those people, they just did what they felt was right. They didn't have a king. God was supposed to guide them, so God did give them judges, and as long as the judges were there, they were good, but when the judge died, they went back to their ways. So this was a famine. Elimelech, and his name deals with, I'm just going to leave all that. It's some good stuff, but I'm going to leave it alone. He was from Bethlehem, Judah, which is the place of bread. It's God will provide is Bethlehem. So this is where he's from. He went to live in Moab. He took his wife Naomi and his 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. So some people said, well, if he lives in the place where God provides, why is he leaving there and going to Moab? But God has a plan. So Elimelech actually dies, okay? He leaves the 2 sons and the wife. The 2 sons finally marry Ruth, okay? And, but 10 years later, they die too. So now you've got Naomi. Naomi means pleasant, Noemi. Pleasant. Is that why you named her Noemi? I'm talking to you, Soledad. Yes, pleasant. Okay? Elimelech means God is king. I'm going to name James Elimelech. God is king, because I know he reigns in your life. I know that, okay? But anyway, so you've got this woman, the mother-in-law, and she's got these 2 daughter-in-laws, and she says, go back home. You know, I will have no more sons for you. I cannot help you. So the one daughter, and I want you to pay attention to this word, kindness. Okay, now that's not Oprah or Oprah. That's Ruth. Ruth showed kindness. But Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye. I learned so much in my study. Orpah means back of the neck. And it talked about she turned back. So when she went back to Moab, but Ruth clung to her. She says, where you go, I'll go. Your God will be my God. We got two different, we got Israelites and we got Moabites, and you got two cultures. But she says, where you go, I go. Your God will be my God. So she shows compassion. So they arrive at the beginning of the barley fest. Remember the barley, I told you, the barley harvest. So if you could do the next slide, and I'll try to go a little faster this next time. My daughters, should I seek rest for you? So she's given advice to Ruth, and she's telling her what to do. Now, Boaz is our next of kins, a kinsman redeemer, okay? So if you can get a kinsman redeemer, you want to, a woman's life at that time was nothing more than being married and having children. I'm sorry, that's just what it is. So she wants her daughter-in-law to do well. She tells him what to do. I'm sorry you guys can't see this, but she tells him. So Ruth goes and works in the fields. She's bringing some of the barley home and taking care of her mother-in-law. And she tells Ruth, watch where he lays down at. 5 minutes, I got it, thank you. Watch where he lays down at. And when he lays down, then you go quietly and go and lay down next to him. So she did exactly what her mother-in-law told her. He woke up. Who is this? He was startled because she laid at his feet. And he basically said to her, may you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness. And I keep putting kindness in large letters because it's a fruit of the Spirit, okay? So may this kindness that you've done, and he says, and the townspeople know it. But first I got to do this. There's one kinsman closer than me. I've got to ask him if he wants to marry you. He goes, he sees this guy. He meets him at the town gate with some witnesses. And he says, yes. He says, oh, but when you take the land, you got to take the wife, blah, 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 He says, oh, I can't do it. You do it. So they take off the shoe, give him the shoe, and that's the agreement. Okay, we're going to go to the next slide, please. Oh, and so, but before he left to go meet with them, he gave her 6 measures of barley. He says, I don't want you to return back to your mother-in-law empty. And that's about 30 pounds, I think it said. So that was a nice gift to give her. He went to the gate. We already talked about the elders were the witness. He says, buy it for yourself. So now he's, so everything that belonged to Naomi, the property, the names for their children, now they marry. Okay, we're going to go to the next one, please. Oh, and they had a son. You don't have to go back, but they had a son, Ruth. Now, Ruth has been through a lot. She went from one nation to another nation, different cultures. She lost a husband. She followed her mother-in-law. You don't know how it's going to work out for you. Could be good, could be bad. So she's been through widowhood. Now she gets married. Now she's got a child. And the child's name is Obed, okay? So Ruth, they marry, they conceive. The woman tell Naomi, Noemi, blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. And it is. Okay, so we're going to go on. So Obed was the father of Jesse, and Jesse was the father of David. Yes, thank you, Auntie Linda. Okay, so the fruit of the Spirit, and I've got this kindness again for you. And we need to spread kindness. So I hope that in that little card that you may have gotten, you look at it and it may say something like spread kindness. And so that goes with the story about Ruth. So mothers, if you didn't get an envelope, please make sure that you get one. And this is kind of wrapping up this message. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. Just as the Father knows me and I know the Father, I lay down my life for the sheep. And I have other sheep that are not of this fold. Ruth was not of this fold, but he brings them in. He has a purpose. So they are not of this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd. For this reason, the Father loves me, because I lay down my life that I take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down on my own accord. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. This charge I have received from my Father. Thank you, Jonathan. I'm rounding down, okay? So this one just kind of takes you through Judah, Perez, Boaz. We already talked about. We've got Obed, who was the son of Boaz and Ruth. And then we've got Jesse. And if you remember Samuel from last year, Mother's Day, Samuel was scared of Saul. He says, he's going to know I'm going to anoint a king. He says, no, just go, you do a sacrifice. So he goes out. He says, I'll show you who the king's going to be. And Jesse had seven boys. So the first one comes in, he's tall. Oh, I know he's the one. Nope. God said, nope, that's not him. Second one, third one, fourth one, fifth one comes through. Sixth one comes through. No, God hasn't said anything. So he says, Jesse, you got another son? He says, yeah, he's over there keeping the sheep. Get him in here. He comes in, he's ruddy, he's handsome, but that's King David, okay? So we're coming down through this line, and the next, okay, so this is another scripture, but this is about the priesthood permanently. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but if you've been reading the Daily Audio Bible, there's a lot of priests. And Phineas and Hophni are bad. Samuel is there. Samuel is good. But these priests come and go. And he tells him, he says, your people are not going to live long, Eli. They're not going to live long. And so this talks about how the priests come and go. They're, let's see, he offered up once for himself. Anyway, this makes Jesus the guarantor of a better covenant. Okay, those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them, okay? For it was indeed fitting that we should have such a high priest. And now we're all the way through that line to Jesus, holy, innocent, unstained, separated from sinners, and exalted above the heavens. That's our God, okay? Okay, and I think maybe one more or two. Is that about it? I have to put this in here. I hope Susan is well. I love you, Susan. I love all of you. I hadn't seen her this morning. You know, I've been kind of not stressing, be ye anxious for nothing, but I kept telling you when you say something to me, I see you Sunday. I said, pray for me, pray for me. Susan walked by me. She says, Isaiah 55:11. That's all she said. Isaiah 55:11. So shall my word be that goes out from my mouth. It shall not return to me empty, but it shall accomplish that which I purpose, and shall succeed in the thing for which I sent it. Thank you, Susan. Thank you. All right, so the very first slide said, and I'm not going to go back to it, but it was the title. And the title was, thank you, daughter, Password Unknown. I had the in here because really, Ruth didn't know her purpose. She didn't know that Jesus was going to come through her line. But the password is known, okay? It's Jesus. That's the password. So, thank you. Thank you, thank you. I've got one thing that I want to read, and then I've got one song. If Pastor, is it okay? Do I have that? Okay. So mothers, you would have gotten this in a little envelope with the thing that says spread kindness. Okay, so this is something that you can read that will just give you some prayers when certain things are happening. But the one that I want to read now is on the very back cover, and I'm going to read it to you. But this says, if you have recognized the longing to be saved from your sin, here is the suggested prayer to ask Jesus for help. So I'll read it, and if you want to repeat it with me or just concentrate it in your mind, it says, Dear God, I pray that you will forgive me for the things that I've done wrong. and that you would increase my faith to trust in you. I believe in the salvation that is offered through the death and resurrection of your Son, Jesus Christ. Please help me to live in a way that is honoring to you. Amen. God bless you.